Hey, I'm Alex Roman, Executive Editor for Metro Magazine, and welcome back to METROspectives. Today, my guest is President and CEO of the American Bus Association, Fred Ferguson. Today, Ferguson joins me to discuss the impact the tariffs will have on the industry, his experience at his first ABA marketplace, the state of the industry today, and much more. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Well, we're glad to welcome back Fred Ferguson from the ABA, President and CEO. Just experienced his first marketplace. We want to talk a little bit about that with him. So let's get started there, Fred. First, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's been maybe 6 months. I
Yeah,
was fresh on the job the last time we spoke, and now I'm feeling like a veteran.
yeah, that's good. I think the job is to hit the ground running, right? Obviously, with the association.
So my job training could not officially close until I went through Marketplace.
Right.
So I've made it through Marketplace. I've experienced board meetings, council meetings, committee meetings, a lot of site visits, state association meetings. Now I've done our full Marketplace. So I feel like I've got my legs under me now.
Now you're ready to go. So talk a little bit about your first marketplace. Kind of talk a little bit about your experience and maybe some of the things that were highlights of the show, looking back.
Well, you have to start with the numbers. So we facilitated over 100,000 business appointments.
Come on.
So we have about 3,000 people that attend Marketplace. And when they come, they are coming to take appointments with other people in the travel industry so that they can make connections and basically build their sales pipeline for the year. And they do that across over 100,000 appointments. So seeing that appointment floor, the size, the scale, how many desks, how organized and choreographed, the different meetings are.
Mhm.
People are going from one desk to the next every 7 minutes. And people are taking between 40 and 60 appointments. So that type of economic activity is completely and totally inspiring. If you think about our industry, it's a lot of generationally owned family businesses. Most of them are small businesses. Most of them are tucked in a specific region of the country.
Right.
But Marketplace affords them a national sales platform. And so the connections people make, um, the bookings, it truly is life changing for some of these businesses. And they're telling me as such as I'm walking the floor. So that was something I was not prepared for. Everybody talked about how Marketplace is very much a family experience. And I assumed it's because people have worked in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years. And I think that's a part of it. But I think people are really making, huge economic inroads when they come to Marketplace. So it's a mix of great people, great business, great entertainment, great food, in Philadelphia. So people are just really, really happy and excited. And so that kind of energy and passion, I was not prepared for. I worked for a company where we sold consumer products, and our trade shows were very much, I don't know, typical trade show. You got a booth and you exhibit, and the energy levels were not nearly as high because I don't think as much business was being booked.
Right.
But in our industry, the show convening factor is still a game changer, and it was fun to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to multiple marketplaces, and I'm always impressed with the precision that those meetings go off with. We have an event, it's kind of a speed dating kind of idea, but we're doing it, 25 companies or so. Not doing it where it's like, half of that show floor
Yeah,
is all people taking appointments and it's always very impressive the way that goes on. I know that takes a lot of work. So, kudos to the team for always, getting that show off and, doing a fantastic job, keeping people happy despite them essentially really, doing a lot of work in
yeah,
for a period of time.
yeah. The team does an amazing job. As the new guy, I can take no credit for the success of Marketplace because the team they've got it on such amazing organizational path that I can walk in as a new guy and they didn't miss a beat.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, outside of that, and that's obviously very important. But we're kind of at a changing time. We had talked a little bit about the unknown predictor of new administration and some things coming down the road. What's kind of the sense you got from your motor coach operators as far as optimism, for the upcoming year and kind of some of the things learned from Marketplace?
Well, unfortunately, the day the show kicked off was the day the 25% tariff was announced on
Mm,
Canadian and Mexican imports.
right.
And, the motor coach manufacturing happens across North America. Seats are made in Mexico, engines and transmissions are made in the US. The motor coach itself is finished off in Canada. So we have this integrated supply chain that's been established over many decades. And we're looking at now the transmission that's made in America could be sent to Canada and hit with a tariff. The transmission gets put into a motor coach, is sent back to the US, and is then hit with a tariff. So we're staring down a double whammy that really could send us backwards. Our motor coach survey showed that in 2024, we sold 20% more motor coaches than we did in 2023. That's
Right.
a huge increase.
Yeah.
But, if the cost of parts and the finished bus go up by 25%, that's going to have an immediate effect on our industry's ability to service passengers, to convene trips, to host tours. So that had a lot of chatter on the show floor, so much so that during my opening speech to the marketplace, 3,000 people in the audience, I was actually able to bring up two other association leaders with me.
Mm,
One was Scott Michael from the United Motor Coach Association, and the other was Vince Accardi from Motor Coach Canada. And the message that we wanted to send is that the Canadian associations, the US associations, we are standing together with one message and one voice, to represent our industry before, policymakers in Canada and the US, to explain our industry, to talk about our $100 billion impact, to talk about the 500,000 jobs that we support,
mhm.
so that we can make a case for relief and exemptions from these tariffs, because we are an industry that it's not as if our industry just offshored 2 years ago. We've had this integrated North American supply chain for decades, and
Right.
the tariffs really could send us backwards.
Yeah. And so post show, we're here a week after the show or so. Can you talk a little bit about what the ABA is doing and what you're doing in concert with some of the other associations in the
Yeah,
industry?
our team, you'd get a lot of steps in at Marketplace. I think I was over 15,000 a day. Our team has been on Capitol Hill ever since we got back, and we're meeting with congressional offices, Senate offices, committee offices, and we're showing them the data. We funded a study that was put out the day the tariffs were announced that shows that if the Canada tariffs go forward, our industry will lose 15,000 jobs and $3 billion in economic activity in 1 year. And so, what we want to show our partners on Capitol Hill is that data. If these tariffs move forward, we're going to be losing economic activity, we're going to be losing tax revenue. And so, any money the government may make on tariffs, they're going to lose on the back end. And all the while, passengers, bus service, evacuations, troop movements that our industry is supporting, they will be impacted by fewer motor coaches, higher costs. And we're just trying to make our case so that as the government is putting the finishing touches on whatever the trade package is, that our perspective is well represented and we have a chance to get some relief.
Yeah. And can I talk a little bit about, can we talk a little bit about how that process is going? I know a big issue during COVID was that a lot of politicians weren't familiar with the industry or familiar maybe even with some of the players in the industry. Um, were there some inroads from that experience to be able to approach people and to know kind of who and where to go to?
Yeah, I think it's made a huge difference. So much of lobbying is just it's marketing. It's making sure a group of consumers, in this case, it's congressional offices, understand who you are, what you do, and why you do it. So ever since I've started, we've had a very intentional and consistent strategy to go up on the hill and introduce ourselves. We're a $100 billion industry. We employ 500,000 people. We have 1,900 motor coach operators across the country. We want people to know those bullet points as well as you and I know those bullet points.
Right.
And it's just consistency. It's showing up at events. It's having meetings. It's meeting with the representative, but it's also meeting with the staff assistant and making sure that our perspective is well represented. We've submitted our organization support for the Secretary of Transportation, for the leader of the Federal Transit Agency. We want the Senate committees that are considering those nominations to know that ABA supports those nominees for the following reasons. That's something that we haven't done in the past. We typically would weigh in after the Senate has already voted. But we want to be in on the ground floor with some of these leaders to say, hey, we were with you from day one, because that has an impact. If you can show support from the early days, they're more likely to support you, as we get into our policy agenda. So we also are very fortunate at ABA. Our board of directors during the Philadelphia marketplace, we presented a 2025 policy agenda to our board, and they accepted it unanimously. So the policy agenda talks about, core categories that we're going to focus on, for core bills that we're going to focus on, and that is our roadmap as a team. And there's kind of an old expression, it's not your to-do list, it's your not to-do list. And what the policy agenda does for us is it gives us laser focus. And there's a million issues we can focus on, but we're going to zero in on the things that we know we can make an impact on, such as improving intercity bus service, making sure the tour and travel industry is well protected, that tourism is an economic driver and should be treated as a legitimate industry that it is. We want to make sure that safety policy is not compromised. So when we talk about federal agencies cutting staff, we have to make sure our safety functions are not sacrificed, because without a safe, roadway, we can't do what we do. So it's things like that that our policy agenda brings to life. And I'm happy to share a copy with you, because we want people to know about it, to follow it, because we think that our agenda is really representative of the entire group travel industry's agenda.
Right. Yeah, that would be great. And we could also help share it out to our readers. Can you talk a little bit about a little bit more about this agenda? Maybe some of the additional key points in addition to what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think another one is, we have to have a policy framework that is supportive of innovation and best practices when it comes to technology. So what that means is there's a lot of people who assume that because we have Tesla charging stations all over the country, that buses and over-the-road transportation can go electric.
Right.
And I think what you're seeing from our manufacturers is electric buses are in our future, but to deploy them at scale and to be able to move passengers from Florida to California, there's simply not infrastructure in place to facilitate those types of bus trips. Now, if you're driving around town and you see your city transit bus that's an EV, that's a little different because they're on a closed loop. It's a very managed route. But if you think about motor coaches, we're all over the country. We're interstate at any given time. So we have to push policymakers, one, don't force us to go electric before the infrastructure is in place. But also, here's some policies and things that we think you should think about that will help the infrastructure, that will help the build out, to more diversity in our vehicles. There's hydro cells, there's EVs, there's the internal combustion engine.
Right.
At this point, it's kind of an all of the above approach. And we are going to oppose any kind of one-sided mandate that requires us to go too fast and too quick. We've seen some of that in California. Now, there's been some pullback, which has been positive, but we want, our followers to know that we are pro-innovation and we're pro, multiple propulsion systems, but they have to be deployed safely and at scale to meet the use case of the motor coach operator, which is far different than a city bus or far different than even your family's, EV that you can take cross country.
Right. And can you talk about, I mean, I'm sure people are watching this and aren't necessarily invested in motor coaches. So can you talk a little bit about, some of the whys to this approach? Because, I think the key thing being is the difference between it's basically funded versus unfunded mandates, right? I mean, it's putting an impetus on these companies to go electric to undertake all of that additional investment with no additional funding coming in to help them do that.
Yeah, exactly. So think about if you're driving a bus full of 56 passengers, a lot of your stops are dictated by bathroom breaks and food breaks.
Right.
And so those stops, as you're building your itinerary and your trip plan, you need to have charging infrastructure connected to those types of stops for our industry.
Mhm.
And today, as you think about charging stations, they're not at facilities that can handle 56 person group stopping to get a bite to eat. You know, these could be larger restaurants that can sustain groups, larger groups. We don't have charging infrastructure at those places. A lot of attractions, whether it's an amusement park or a national park, they don't have the infrastructure to charge, a 56 person motor coach. So when we're facilitating these trips, we have to be mindful of that. But what we also want to communicate is, our buses are filled with clean diesel technology. The air that comes out in some cases is cleaner than the air that goes in. And that's
Right.
through years of innovation and regulation. But also, anytime you see a bus full of people, you have to say to yourself, that's between 30 and 40 cars that are not on the road. And that's a good thing. That's good for traffic. That's good for the environment. We've got lots of research that shows motor coach transportation is the most efficient form of transportation, out there. Better than airplanes, better than trains, better than individual cars. We get people from point A to point B more efficiently and cleaner than any other form of transportation. And that's something we have to lean into as well.
Yeah. Thanks again for your time, Fred. I appreciate it. I think I just wanted to kind of close a little bit with, some of the things I heard from the motor coach industry. I went through a tough time 5 years ago, and 5 years later, here we are. We're still, the industry is still slowly coming out of this, um, stronger, sleeker, smarter. What are some of the things you're hearing from the industry? What are some of kind of the the positive notes that you got out of marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, experiential travel is in. I don't think you have to look any further than your own Instagram account or TikTok. People love to travel. They love to have experiences right now. And so we've seen as the travel industry has gone up, bus travel has also gone up. Buses facilitate a lot of tours, a lot of travel between places that maybe are harder to get to. And so I think we're riding that wave of experiential travel.
Mhm.
And I mentioned the data, motor coach sales were up 20% last year. Pre-COVID, we had 3,000 operators of motor coaches, companies that is. That fell to 1,500. Today, we're back to 1,900. So you're seeing some positive data points that are showing that the industry is coming back, that we're doing things well. We just hope that travel continues. We want to be welcoming and open to Canadian visitors, to Mexican visitors, to international visitors, European, Asia. The United States is an amazing place to visit. We've got incredible decade of sporting events coming up, the World Cup, the Olympics, the Ryder Cup. We've got the US is celebrating its 250th anniversary. ABA, we turn 100 next year. So there's a
Right.
lot of positive things happening. And we want to work with our policymakers to make sure that, again, travel, tourism, trade policy is reflective of this economic driver that is, good for local economies, but it's also good for people's personal well-being because whenever someone is stressed out and ready to hit their limits, oftentimes they take a trip. use your PTO, get out of the office. Like it's
Right.
healthy. People need to do more of that. And we want to be there to help people to reach their final destination.
Right. And also, the Intercity bus report came out during the show as well, and then that's showing positive growth in that industry as well as far as you know fulfilling some trips that typically were used by airports or people would
Hey,
fly the city point A to point B.
ask just about anybody. I live along the I-95 corridor. Would you rather get in a plane from DC to New York that's going to be all in, maybe 6 hours and two TSA body checks later, or hop on a bus? You can be point A to point B in 4 hours. So
Right.
a lot of people are realizing that bus travel across states is actually a really enjoyable form of travel. If you talk about trends, the inside of these motor coaches are tricked out. Comfortable seating, more leg room, all the amenities you would expect, charging stations, the airflow. It's a really good ride, and people are seeing that, and that's why the numbers show the increases.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Fred. Is there anything else you would like to mention about marketplace, about the industry, kind of state of the industry, anything that, why we have the privilege of having you here that you'd like to
No,
add?
I appreciate what you do. Marketplace is going west. We're going to be in Reno, Nevada in 2026.
Oh, great.
I think that's reflective of, the West Coast is a major destination point for international and domestic visitors alike. I'm from Utah, which we're home to the Mighty Five national parks.
Mhm.
So I think being on the West is going to give us an opportunity to showcase other parts of the country that are amazing in their own rights. And we're really excited for Reno 2026.
Yeah, this should be exciting, and I hope to catch that one. I wasn't able to make this one, but
Yes,
congratulations.
please.
Yeah, congratulations on a great marketplace, and we'll talk to you again soon, and keep up to date on what's going on in the motor coach industry.
All right, Alex. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Fred.